Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We continue with Beau Geste. Chapter 5, Arrival in Africa. It was early in the morning when we reached Oran. A sergeant came on board, called roll, and then marched us ashore. I was in Africa, said I to myself, as down the wide street of flat-roofed houses we marched, stared at by native Africans, burnous-clad Arabs, French soldiers, and European civilians. On through narrow slums and alleys we went, till at length the town was behind us and the desert in front. For an hour or more we marched by road across the desert until we came inside of an old building, another obsolete fort, which Boldini said was Fort St. Therese, our destination. In the courtyard of the barrack, hostelry roll was again called, and then we followed our sergeant to a barrack room. As I went in, a well-known voice remarked, "Enter the third robber." It was Digby's! Michael and Digby were sitting on a bench, hands in their pockets, pipes in their mouths, and consternation upon their faces. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Michael. "You unutterable fool!" I fell upon them. While I shook Michael's hand, Digby shook my own, and while I shook Digby's hand, Michael shook my head. They then threw me upon the bed, and we all fell in a heap. Then we realized that we were objects of interest to the others, particularly Boldini. "Third robber," he muttered to a German called Glock. "Beau and Dig," said I. "Let me introduce two sure-enough partners from God's own country, Hank and Buddy, my brothers Michael and Digby." They laughed and held out their hands. "Americans, possibly," said Digby. "Shake," said Hank and Buddy as one. "Mr. Francisco Boldini and I, my brothers." But neither Michael nor Digby offered his hand until Boldini reached for it. "I think wine is indicated, gentlemen," he said, and eyeing us, added, "When we were three robbers meet again, so to speak." Michael invited Hank and Buddy to join us, and Boldini led the way to the canteen, where the three of us sat, drinking little and watching the others drink a good deal, for which Michael insisted on paying. Boldini told us, among other things, that the African daily ration was half a pound of meat, 3 sous worth of vegetable stew, 1.5 pounds of bread, half an ounce of coffee, and half an ounce of sugar. He said it was nourishing but deadly monstrous. "Still, one gets used to it, just as one gets used to washing with soap and water," he said. "Or do you fine gentlemen wash with champagne and a slice of cake?" It struck me that Boldini was a man who would need keeping in his place. At the same time, I was glad to see that Beau and Digby seemed to like Hank and Buddy as much as I did. Of the other recruits, only one struck me as interesting. He was well dressed and well spoken, probably an ex-officer of the French or Belgian army. He had soldier stamped all over him. He called himself Jean Saint-André, but I suspected a third name with a "de" in front of it. He had rather attached himself to us three, and we all liked him. Toward evening, Beau proposed that we brothers should spend a minimum of time in our loathsome barrack room, its sole furniture being a great wooden guard bed, innocent of mattress, on which a score of men were expected to lie side by side. Digby observed that the air in the courtyard would be much cleaner. So we selected an eligible corner and seated ourselves in a row against the wall, and prepared for a night under African stars. "Well, my idiotic pup, what do you think you're doing here?" began Michael as soon as we were settled and our pipes alight. "Fleeing from justice," said I. "Did you bring the blue water with you?" asked Digby. "No." "Careless," said Michael. "But bring us up to date on things. How's everybody bearing up?" I told them the details of my evasion and the respective attitudes of Augustus, Claudia, and Isabel. "It's rough on Aunt Patricia," I concluded. £30,000, mused Digby. "Uncle Hector will go mad and bite her when he finds out." "Doesn't bear thinking of," said I. In the silence that followed, I was aware of a sound close beside us, where a buttress of the wall projected, probably a rat or some nocturnal bird, possibly a dog. "When are we going to let them know we're in the Legion?" I asked at last. "Why let them know at all?" said Michael. "Runaway criminals don't write home." "But, Beau," I objected, "how are they to let us know if the stone turns up, if they don't know where we are?" "True," agreed Michael. "At least we ought to let Aunt Patricia know we're hale and hearty, but without telling her that we're all together. We don't want some fool saying that we agreed to share the blame while the thief is still at Brandon Abbas." "Who is the thief?" said Digby. "I am," said Michael. "Then why didn't you put it back?" "Too late now. Besides, I want to lie low, then sell it for £30,000 5 years hence. I'll invest the money and have the income for life. Live like Uncle Hector." "On Uncle Hector's money," I said. "Doubles the joy of it, what?" replied Michael. "Funny thing," put in Digby. "That's just what I was going to do, except I find one can't get more than 20,000. I'm going to put it into a South Sea Island plantation, buy a schooner, and be my own supercargo. Honolulu, ukuleles, surf riding." "What are you doing with the blue water meanwhile?" I asked, humoring the humorous. "Always carrying it about with me," said Digby. "If I get an eye knocked out, I shall wear it in the empty socket. Blue-eyed boy. Good idea, that." "Rotten idea," objected Michael. "Marsupial in the tip. Kangaroo custom. They carry about their young and their money and things in that sort of a bag in front, accessible. I keep it on me night and day. Wash leather pouch and a money belt I bought in London. Diamond merchants always wear them, and they travel round their little tummies under their vests." And so we ragged and chatted until, towards morning, we dozed, and the dawn found us cold and stiff, but quite happy. We were together. Life, the world, and adventure before us. A third draft of recruits arrived after morning soup, and we learned that all were to be evacuated that day to Sidi Bel Abbas, depot of the 1st Regiment. As we were falling in to march to Orange Station, Baldini came up to my brothers and me. "Let's stick together, we four," he said. "I know the ropes at Sidi. Can get you in right with the corporals. Sergeant Lejeune's a friend of mine." "We brothers are certainly sticking together," said Michael. At the station we entertained a poor specimen of the West Algerian Railway Company that made its way to Sidi Bel Abbas at an average rate of 10 miles an hour. I remember being surprised that the African countryside mainly consisted of cultivated fields, orchard, and gardens, and it was not until we were approaching our destination that sandhills and wilderness prevailed. We reached Sidi Bel Abbas in the evening. Here we were lined up and marched off in fours along a broad road. As we marched, I got a somewhat Spanish impression of the outskirts of the town, probably because I heard the tinkling of a guitar and saw some woman with high combs and a mantilla. Entering the town itself from a gate in the huge ramparts, we were in a curiously hybrid atmosphere in which moved stately Arabs, smart rich ladies of French descent, camels, men, women, straight from the Bible, and others straight from the boulevards. No less hybrid was the architecture. The eye passed from white mosque to gaudy cafe, and then to Moorish domes to French newspaper kiosks, and from Eastern bazaars to Western hotels. Turning from a main thoroughfare, we entered a lane between the barracks and the Spahis cavalry and those of the Foreign Legion. Through the railings of great iron gates we could see a colossal yellow building at the far side of the parade ground. A door was opened beside the gate, and we filed through. A guard observed us, without enthusiasm. The sergeant of the guard emerged with the guardhouse and looked us over, and then closed his eyes while he slowly shook his head. A knot of men clad in white uniforms with wide blue sashes gathered and regarded us. Boldini affected deafness. Then appeared from the regimental offices the only man I have ever met who seemed to me to be wholly bad, evil all through. He was a fierce-looking, thick-set man, glaring of eye, swarthily handsome, with the jaw of a bulldog. He also had the curious teeth-bearing jaw thrust of a bulldog, and there were 2 deep lines between the heavy brows. There was the terrifying color sergeant, Lujuan. To his superior he was invaluable. To his subordinates unspeakable. Later, through a deserter from the Belgian army, we learned that Lujuan had been dismissed from the Belgian Congo for atrocities exceeding even the limit fixed by good King Leopold's men. But now in the Legion he clearly had scope for his brutality. Lujuan called the roll and looked us over. Noting the insignificant stature of Buddy, his face set in a sneer. "An undersized cur," he remarked to the sergeant of the guard. "Guess I've seen better things than you dat on flypaper anyhow," replied Buddy, who did not mistake the contempt in the sergeant's tone. Mercifully, Lujuan knew no English, but he knew that a recruit had dared to open his miserable mouth. He roared, "Silence, dog! Speak again and I'll kick your teeth down your throat." But he did not understand a word, but he heard the angry roar, and he was too old a soldier not to stiffen to attention. The mischief was done, however, and Buddy's friends were marked men. When Lujuan's eye fell upon Boldini, it halted, and a long look passed between them. Neither spoke. In time it became clear to us that there was an old bond between the 2 men. Verine, the Belgian deserter, told us that Boldini had been a civilian subordinate in Lujuan's Congo district and had been imprisoned for falsifying his trade returns. Of the truth of this I know nothing, but I do know that Lujuan favored Boldini, and later, when himself became sergeant major, he procured Boldini's promotion to corporal. Next, Lujuan looked at us Geste. "Runaways," he said, "show me your hands." We held them out. "Going to tell our fortunes? Beware, a dark, ugly man," whispered Digby to me. "Never done a stroke of work in your lives. I'll manicure you before you die." He looked Hank over. "A lazy hulk," he observed. "I'll teach you to move quickly, in a way that'll surprise you." "Sure, bro," replied Hank, ignorant of what he had been told. "Quiet, you chattering ape. Speak again, and I'll cripple you for life." Hank also grasped that silence was golden. Having duly impressed the draft, Color Sergeant Lujuan announced that the 7th Company would be afflicted with the lot of us. He then roared in French. We marched to the storeroom and searched our kit, which, in addition to 2 cloth uniforms, included white fatigue uniforms, underclothing, blue sash and boots, but no socks, for the Legion does not wear them. We were then inspected by a non-com called an adjutant major, and marched to our casernes, or barrack rooms. 10 of us, Boldini, Saint-Andre, Buddy, Hank, Glock, 2 newcomers called Vogue and Maris, and we brothers, were directed to a huge, clean chamber in which were 30 beds. Here we were then handed over to some legionnaires who were polishing their belts and kits. "Recruits for you," said the Corporal Dupre. "Show them what to do. Kit, bedding, everything." And he left the room. "Name of a name of a name," gabbled one of the men. "If it isn't old Boldini come back," he roared with laughter. "Wait till I'm a corporal. friend Brandit, said Boldini. Meanwhile, take 5 of the recruits, and I'll attend to the others. Boldini proceeded to direct us to appropriate beds and put our kits on them. He then gave us an exhibition of clothes folding and built up a neat little pile of uniform and kit on the shelf above his bed. There you are, do that first, he said. Everything in elbow to fingertip length. Pile high. And we set about folding our kits as he had done. Then we had a lesson in polishing of belts and cartridges and pouches, and then in rifle cleaning. That night after the lights out bugle, we completed our kit preparations for the morrow by the meager light of the Casern night lamp. We gathered that we should be aroused at 5:15 in the morning, and should have to be on parade with everything immaculate at 5:30. So, with the fears of the novice, we recruited, determined to have everything ready before we went to bed. Michael's bed was in the corner by the window. Boldini's was next, Digby's next, and then of an Italian called Colonna. Mine came next, and then Brant's, then Buddy's, and so on. Always an old legionnaire next to a recruit. By the door was the bed of Corporal Dupre, who was in command of the escouade. Apparently he was an active, bustling person, not unkindly when sober, but when overfull of wine he was sullen and dangerous. While we were putting the last touches to our kits and extracting advice from Boldini, he came into the room and went to bed. As he lay down, he bawled, "Silence! If any man makes a sound, he'll make the next sound in the hospital," and fell asleep. We got into our beds in a silence that could be felt. I was awakened by shouting, and the lamps were lit that hung from the ceiling. Men sat up in bed. Each took a mug from a hook below the shelf above his head and held it out as the garde chambre went round with a great jug of coffee. It was hot and strong. Next, Corporal Dupre shouted, "Levezeras," and Michael Digby and I rushed to the lavatory, dashed our heads into the water, and fled back toweling. In a short time we were dressed and ready, with our beds made and our kits laid out. The garde chambre had swept up the dust, and Corporal Dupre had been round to see that everything was tidy. And then, following a shout of "Garde à vous," the color sergeant of the company entered to inspect. Remarkably, the great man's face remained impressive throughout his inspection. All was well. We took our rifles from the rack, put our bayonets in their frogs, and clattered down to the parade ground. There the battalion was marched to field exercises, and the recruits were told off by escouades and taken out to a drill ground for physical training, which today was running. On other mornings it took the form of gymnastics, boxing, or a long route march. That first day set the pattern of our routine. On our return to the barracks, we had our morning meal of Legionnaire's soup and a quarter-liter of wine. After a rest, we recruits had a lecture and drill, while the battalion did attack formation exercise on the plateau. And then, having tidied up around the barracks, we were free to go to wash our uniforms. At 5 o'clock we got our second meal exactly like the first, and were then finished for the day, save that we had to polish our arms and equipment. Yet here the poverty of the Legion helped us, for no man had to do a stroke while he had a halfpenny to spare. To our comrades, a job meant the means of getting a pack of corporal cigarettes, a bottle of wine, or a piece of much-needed soap. We 3 did not shirk our work, but often, when weary, we gave our work to one of the many who begged to do it. Aided by our intelligence, strength, and sense of discipline, and a genuine desire to make good, we 3 soon became good soldiers. More fortunate than most, we were all educated and had a little money. Less fortunate than most, we were accustomed to varied food, comfortable surroundings, leisure, and above all, privacy. But at first everything was new and romantic, and we were together, and we were by no means unhappy. On our first Sunday morning in the Legion, we three sat on Michael's bed and held a council of war, as we had done at Brendan Abbas. Having learned from Bodini that the English police would not pursue a legionnaire so long as he remained in the Legion, it was decided I should write to Isabel, telling her where I was, and that I knew where Michael and Digby were, and could send them any messages. Isabel was to use her discretion as to admitting that she knew where I was. Michael and Digby approved my letter. A fortnight later I received a reply from Isabel, and Patricia had communicated neither with the police nor anybody else. Apparently she had accepted the fact that one of the Gestes had stolen the blue water, and incredibly was doing nothing about it, simply awaiting Uncle Hector's return. I cannot understand her, Isabel wrote. She has told Gussie and Claudia and myself that we are free of suspicion, and she wishes us to make no further references to the matter. Gussie is, of course, unbearable. He has known all along that you three would come to be a bad end. But while certain that you are all in it together, he believes that you, John, are the actual thief. I told him that I had a belief too. I said I believed that if you gave your whole soul to it, Gussie, you might some day be fit to clean John's boots. I don't know what Uncle Hector will say about the delay in going to Scotland Yard. It almost looks as though Aunt wants the culprit to escape. I can't make it out at all. Michael read this letter without comment. I wonder why Aunt Patricia hasn't called the police, I remarked at last. Yes, said Michael. Funny, isn't it? Then turning, I noticed that Boldini was asleep on his bed behind us. It was curious how quietly that man could move, with his cat-like steps and silent ways. As the weeks passed, Boldini stuck to us closer than a brother sticketh, and after his first usefulness was over, we certainly did not desire his society for himself alone, but apparently he desired ours, and ardently. The only times that we were not troubled by his presence was when Buddy was with us. The American would have none of him, and scrupled not to say so. Get out of here, Boldini, he would say. Go gnaw circles in the meadow, and get away from me with both feet. Scoot. Then he would turn to us and say, Watch out, he's on your trail for something. He's Lugine's spy. Another person who was most certainly on our trail was Color Sergeant Lugine himself, now, alas, Sergeant Major. We were far too careful, however, to give him the opportunity he desired. When he came in for inspection, he gave our kits and beddings a longer, more searching inspection than he gave anybody else's, except Buddy's. And when I met the stare of his eyes, I thought of a panther whose sole mental content was hate. Our name's Mud, said Buddy. He makes me feel like I knocked into a grizzly bear, only I'd like the bear better. It was also clear that Corporal Dupre had found that he had said the wrong thing when he told Lugine that we were model recruits. Dupre was not a bad fellow at heart, but he had got to live, and it grew clearer that the weeks went by that we three could do nothing right and Boldini nothing wrong. Our chief offense was that we would commit no offense, but we would walk on very thin ice. In less than a couple of months, we became full-blown legionnaires. Above the head of my bed appeared a card bearing the legend, John Smith, number 18896. Soldat d'exme classe. I was a second-class soldier of fortune. In time, I should be a soldat première classes, if I were good. Meanwhile, we now learned what marching really was, and why the legionnaire was known as the cavalier à pied. Over sand and stones under the African sun, with our heavy kits, we would march for appalling distances at 5 kilometers an hour. On one occasion we took a stroll of 500 miles, marching continuously at 30 miles a day. In addition to these marches, we trained in skirmishes and scouting, drill, first aid, field engineering, target practice, and by the time we felt ourselves old soldiers, we also began to feel we were stagnating mentally. Our brains demanded exercise. Michael decreed that we should study Arabic, both for the good of our souls and for future usefulness when we should be generals entrusted with diplomatic missions or military governorship. We got books from the library and engaged a clerk who worked in the Bureau Arab to meet us 4 evenings a week for conversations and took to haunting Arab cafes instead of French. We made rapid progress, and after a time were speaking Arabic to each other. Although we were weary of Louvain, the Americans were not so careful. For one thing, they sometimes drank the filth sold in the low-class wine shops of the Spanish Quarter, while the crude alcoholic brew from figs, rice, or wood made Buddy's temper explosive. It rendered Hank indiscriminately affectionate and, singing joyously, apt to fall upon the neck of the sergeant of the guard, when the latter admitted him at night. Then was Louvain happy when they were confined to barracks. He would have the defaulters roll called at odd times in the hope of their missing it. When they were in the salle de police, he would see that the guard turned them out hourly, under pretense of suspecting that they had to have tobacco or drink. Sometimes in the middle of the night he would go to their cells, arouse them with a roar, and give an order in the hope that it would be disobeyed through resentment or drunken stupidity. I think he would have given a month's pay to have goaded one of them into striking him, and it was my fear that Buddy would do so. However, they were old soldiers and wily Americans. So the months passed, and every week I got a letter from home. Gussie had gone to Sandhurst, and Uncle Hector had postponed his homecoming to shoot bear in Kashmir. No references was ever made to the blue water. No questions had been asked of Isabel, and she had volunteered no information about being in communication with me. One evening, Morris, a Swiss ex-courier who spoke English, came to me as I lay on my cot and said, "Monsieur Smith, you have done me many a good turn. Will you and your brothers meet me at Mustapha's at 6 tonight? It will be worth your while. We shall be safe there, if we talk in English." He glanced apprehensively toward Colonna and an Italian named Guantato, who were working together at a nearby table. I thanked him and said that my brothers and I would be there. Mustapha's was an Arab cafe where we could get splendid coffee very cheaply, thick and black, spiced with hashish oil, orange essence, and other flavorings. Here we rested ourselves on a low divan with a solid wall behind us, and as our little clay cups of coffee lay steaming on the floor in front of us, Morris began his excellent English. "It's like this, my friends. Boldini is up to his old tricks again. Last night I was sitting in the Tlammic Gardens. It was getting dark. Behind the seat were bushes, and a path ran by the other side. Some legionnaires came along and sat down on a seat that must have been just behind the bushes. They were talking Italian. I know Italian well, and I listened. Boldini, it was, and Colonna, and Guantazio. He had been trying to get them to do something, and they were afraid. Boldini also wanted Colonna to change beds with him, to make this something easier to do. "Yes, and what if I am caught?" said Colonna. "What about his brothers and his friends, the Americans?" "And what about your friends?" said Boldini. "Me and Guatazio, Vogue and Goto. What about Sergeant Major Lujan? Aren't Lujan and I like brothers?" Why not do it yourself, then? Said Quatazio. Because I'm going to be made corporal soon, and I mustn't be in any rows. Ah, when I am a corporal, I shall be able to look after my friends, eh? He reminded them of what they could do with 1,000 francs, more than 50 years' pay, for a 2-minute job. Then Guatazio, who seems to be a pluckier person than Colonna, said, How do you know he has got it? Boldini replied, Because I heard them say so. They are a gang. They have asked me if thieves and legionnaire are given up to the police. When they joined each other at Oran, I guessed it from what they said, and the way they flashed their money. They got together at night out in the courtyard, and I crept up behind a buttress and listened. I could not hear everything, but they spoke of a jewel robbery and 30,000 pounds. The one they call Beau said he kept it like the kangaroo in the pouch. And where is that? In a pouch on its stomach? That is where this thief keeps his jewel. It's 1,000 francs for the man that gets me the pouch. I'll take the risk of getting the jewel sold for more than 1,000. I could put the lamp out, and one man could gag and hold him while the other got it. Then they could run to their beds in the dark. And much more of the same sort he talked, egging them on, and then they went away, but with nothing settled, said Morris. We burst into laughter at the mention of the kangaroo. Digby asked if Boldini had not also divulged that we wore a sapphire eye. The fool overheard an elaborate joke, explained Michael, but we're much obliged to you. Oh, he is the fool all right, said Morris, but he is also the knave. I just tell you because I like you English gentlemen, and they may try to steal your money. We filled the worthy Morris up with pancakes, honey, and strolled back to the barracks. When we were alone, I said to Michael, You do wear a money belt, Beau. Let me have it at night for a bit, just in case. Why? Well, you could favor these gentle Italians with your full personal attention if you had no property to protect. Also, you could establish that you don't wear a money belt at night. I'd sooner establish despondency in the thief, said Michael. What a lark, chuckled Digby. I'm going to wear a brick under my sash and swear it's a ruby. Anyone that pinches it can have it for keeps. I must find this Boldini lad. Although I did not say so, I did not regard the matter like Digby as a lark. It seemed to me that a man might well be found dead in his bed and nobody be any the wiser. Anyhow, I had underestimated the Legionnaire's odd code of morals. One might steal any article of uniform or kit and be no thief. This was merely to decorate oneself. But to steal private property was far from decoration. It was the ultimate crime, infinitely worse than murder. Such a thief was punished by the men themselves without appeal to authority. This was Legion law, a law I was soon to see in operation. That very night in our barracks I was awakened by a crash and a shout. Springing up, I saw 2 men struggling on the floor near Michael's bed, the one on top pinning the other down with a hand on his throat. Was Michael. As I leapt from my bed, men were running with angry shouts to see what and who had broken their sacred sleep. "Wring the sneakin' coyote's neck, bro," shouted Buddy. And with a cry of "Thief! Thief!" a wave of gesticulating men swept over the two and bore one of them to the surface. It was neither Guantazio nor Colonna, neither Goto nor Vogue. White-faced and imploring, in the grip of a dozen outraged legionnaires, was a man from the next room. I looked around for Boldini. He was sound asleep in his bed, and so was Corporal Dupre, with his face to the wall. Both of the men whom the squeak of a mouse would awaken were asleep. "What are you doing here?" shouted half a score of fierce voices. What about it? Roared the huge, bearded Schwartz, who had got the man by the throat, and to my brother said, Was he stealing? On the table with him, yelled Brandt. Yes, crucify the swine, bawled Schwartz, and the crowd snarled. Several had bayonets in their hands. I lost my way, screamed the prisoner. And found it to the bed of a man who has money, laughed a voice. Legion law. On the table with him. Give the guy a fair trial, shouted Hank, to no avail, and Michael jumped up on the table. Silence, you fools, he shouted to the crowd. Listen, I woke up and found the man feeling under my pillow. I thought he was somebody belonging to the room, somebody I have been waiting for. Well, he isn't. Let him go. He won't come again. At that, there was a yell of derision, and Michael was sent flying by a rush of angry men. While he, Digby, and I were struggling to get to the table, the thief was flung onto it and held down. A bayonet was driven through each of his hands, and another through each of his ears. Suddenly there was a cry of guard, and a swift rush in all directions. The guard and the corporal tramped in, to find a silent room of sleeping men, in the midst of which were we three, pulling bayonets out of a white wooded table, and a whiter whimpering man. What's this? Said the corporal. An accident, he answered himself, and then turned to the guard. He gave the curt order, To the hospital, and the guard carried the wretched creature away. Whether he was incited by Boldini, or was merely trying to rob a man he knew had money, I do not know. When he came out of the hospital, we learned that he was a Portuguese named Boldar. He stuck to his absurd tale that he was feeling his way into what he thought was his own bed, and we concluded that he was either staunch of his confederates or afraid to implicate them. As the old legionnaires prophesied, we heard nothing from the authorities about the assault. Clearly it was considered best to let the men enforce their own laws, provided those laws were reasonable and in the public interest. Within a week or two, however, we were the most famous gang of international jewel thieves in Europe, and had got away with a diamond worth over 1,000,000 francs. Buddy solemnly informed me that Boldar knew all this for certain. Boldar had got it from a friend. No names, but if Hank and Buddy could rescue the diamond, he, Boldar, was in a position to promise them 1,000 francs and the protection of someone who was in a position to protect them. So there you are, pard, concluded Buddy, with an amused grin, and there we were. But only for another month. At the end of that time, we all found ourselves in a selected battalion, 1,000 strong, under orders for the South. We were going to demonstrate there, and demonstrating meant further peaceful penetration with the bayonet and chances of destruction and promotion. And we will continue this story next Friday or Saturday. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.